Well, Clay Golledge is an infectious diseases physician here in Western Australia. He joins me on the front page tonight. Clay, good evening and welcome. Clay, good evening and welcome.
Hi, Jane. Can you hear me?
Yeah, got you loud and clear. Thank you. The wonders of modern technology. Clay, look, thank you for joining us. Sydney so far avoiding a lockdown, but as we've seen on the front page of the Daily Telegraph, that Delta variant is on the march in Sydney. I don't want to be alarmist. The New South Wales government isn't being alarmist. The Berejiklian government's trying very hard to allow freedoms for people, but there are new restrictions, including wearing masks. They've enforced these restrictions in 7 local government areas. Clay, vaccine hesitancy has been a problem. What do you think have been the main contributing factors to hesitancy?
Well, I think with AstraZeneca, it's been obviously a clotting issue, and that just seems to be getting more and more prominent in people's minds. But, you know, we've lost the ability, Jane, to put this into perspective. In the whole of COVID, we've really gone nuts about it all. But let's look at the risk. 3 in 100,000 of clotting, 1 in 2 million of death. You know, if you take an aspirin once a day for a year, your risk of dying from the aspirin is 200 times greater than the AstraZeneca vaccine. So the AZ vaccine, in my mind, has copped a very bum rap, and people just can't seem to be able to process this. And we do need AstraZeneca. We've got to utilise, we've got about 20 million more doses to utilise if we're looking at the new rollout, and we've got to utilise these vaccines. So people have had their first dose and have been fine. They must have their second. And if you haven't had your AZ and you qualify, you should have your first dose and then go on and have your second. It's going to be really important.
Well, look, the Australian's front page tonight, Clay, and we'll take a look at the Else's front page. It says Australia will receive 2.3 million doses of Pfizer every week by the start of October. Now, the paper is also pushing that message that you need both doses, the one you've just given. If you've had your first of AstraZeneca and had no issues, they say you get much better immunity against the Delta variant. This has been highly publicised in the United Kingdom too. Can you explain to us the sort of coverage you get after your first shot of AstraZeneca and Pfizer and then the second shots?
So what's true is Pfizer is better than AstraZeneca for the first shot. So AZ, you really need that second shot to consolidate the immunity. If you have just a single shot of AstraZeneca, your protection may be as low as 30%. Pfizer, it's about twice that. And then Pfizer rises up to about into the 70s to low 80s. AstraZeneca starting, and about 30% going into about 65 to 70% protective after the second dose. That's as against disease acquisition. But protection against severe disease and hospitalisation, both those vaccines are sitting in the 90%. So you've got to look at it that way. So, yes, AstraZeneca is not quite as good, and it does take longer because you need that 12-week gap as against 3-week gap, but it is very good against protecting against severe disease and death, which is basically the thrust of what we're trying to do with our immunisation program.
Okay, well, you can see that story, the millions of Pfizer jabs set for the October rollout, Clay. I'm getting it from a lot of people in their 60s who say they're going to wait for Pfizer or Moderna. There's been talk about the cost of both of the vaccines. Where's this going to end up?
Look, we'll end up in a lot of trouble if we don't utilise our AstraZeneca stocks because we're going to be way behind. And, we've got the vaccine there. It's there in supply. We must use it up. If we're going to wait for Pfizer, we're going to be dribbling on, and we're not going to get people immunised until March or April or May of next year. So to really get into that responsible immunisation numbers, and we need probably 80% or more to get decent herd immunity and protection and open up, we've got to utilise our AZ stock. If you're going to be irresponsible, if you're going to be stupid and wait for Pfizer, and you can go to the back of the queue as far as I'm concerned, if you're 60 to 69, you're going to be looking about the end of the year or maybe early into next year. So I think people have got to stop catastrophising, assess the risk, talk to their doctor. But, it is a very safe vaccine when you look at the incidence of true complication.
Well, I've said it publicly. I waited and as a 52-year-old got the Pfizer, but I'm listening to you and I'm reading very closely about what's happening now after this this Delta variant and people having that first dose of AstraZeneca, very much needing the second dose. Look, Clay, more than 1 million people, this is also important. The vaccination hesitancy. More than 1 million people in the UK have long COVID. Many of them had mild or asymptomatic COVID. So there's still this myth that only older people get COVID and they're the only ones who get sick. Can you just explain for us what long COVID is?
So long COVID it's not very well characterised. So basically what long COVID is there's a small percentage of people, maybe 3 to 5%, that get a chronic fatigue-like illness after a lot of viral illnesses where they're left tired, weak, sore muscles, constant headaches, brain fog, difficulty concentration, heart problems, arrhythmias, that sort of thing, joint pains, rashes. So this sort of chronic illness that debilitates them, much like we see with some of the chronic viral infections and Lyme disease, for instance, as well, Q fever. So it's just a chronic inflammatory response to this virus. And yeah, sure, you can laugh it off and think you've only had a mild illness. And then a few weeks later, you start feeling unwell again and you can't concentrate, you can't work, and you get this phenomenon of long COVID, so which is not treatable, basically. And it's just got to run its course, which may be, we don't know yet, but it may be months, it may be years that you have these symptoms. So yet another reason that you should be vaccinated.
Yeah.
I also want to say to the
Go on, you go.
I also want to say to the AstraZeneca people, like me, I had the choice of the two and I went for AstraZeneca because if I'm spruiking the vaccine, I should be having it myself. But you've got to also realise when you've had your 2 doses of AstraZeneca and you're due for your booster, whenever that might be, 6 months or 12 months, you won't get AstraZeneca again. You're done and dusted with your AstraZeneca because you form antibodies against the viral vectors. So you'll get boosted with a different type of vaccine, almost certainly a messenger RNA vaccine like Pfizer or Moderna. So you're not committing yourself to AstraZeneca for life. You're going to get the 2 doses and that will be it, and then you park that. And then you'll get a booster or something different. So, look, people just need to get on with it, Jane, crack on and stop being so scared about something that's just so vanishingly rare.
Well, look, I think vaccine hesitancy is an enormous problem, and that's why I wanted to talk to you tonight with all of this breaking news on the front pages. I wanted to cover the fact that people can get long COVID. I can't fathom, I have to say this, Clay, I cannot fathom that we're talking about incentivising people when your own health should be incentive enough. One final question for you. We've seen the story of Mark Killian and his wife Anneli, fully vaccinated against COVID weeks ago. They're finally allowed to go to Queensland to see Mark's dying father. It's been an almighty battle. Chris Kenny on Sky News has done a fantastic job. As an infectious diseases expert, what's reasonable? What is reasonable, and where will we go into the future when we've got people who are vaccinated who still have to do 2 weeks hotel quarantine?
Yeah, and that's the ridiculous thing. If you're immunised, you're well, you have a COVID test that's negative, you should be free to move around. And this is what we're talking about when the borders open. When you're coming into Australia, you've got vaccination certificate, you have your COVID test when you board the plane, you have it when you arrive, and then you can go into a short-term home quarantine situation with a monitor. But look, in this sort of situation, they should have been allowed long ago to go and visit the father in hospital. And we've seen this time and time again from Queensland Health. They have been disgraceful in some of the decisions that they've made, that Jeanette Young has endorsed. And look, I'm just finally pleased that common sense has finally prevailed, but it's taken a long time, Jane.